On the morning of June 27, 1976, Air France Flight 139 took off from Tel Aviv on a routine trip to Paris, but after a layover in Athens, 4 terrorists, armed with smuggled pistols and grenades, seized control of the cockpit mid-air. The hijackers forced the pilot to turn south, flying deep into the African continent until they landed in Entebbe, Uganda. Once on the ground, they collected everyone's passports and systematically separated the Israeli and Jewish passengers, locking them inside an abandoned airport terminal. Uganda's unpredictable dictator, Idi Amin, arrived to give speeches, claiming he was acting as a neutral mediator to keep the passengers safe. In reality, he had severed ties with Israel years earlier. His heavily armed soldiers surrounded the terminal, actively guarding the hostages alongside the terrorists. By involving the Ugandan army, the hijackers had secured a second layer of defense. The hostages were no longer just captives of a few radicals. They were prisoners of a sovereign state military, actively collaborating with their captors. Soon, the hijackers issued an ultimatum. Israel and several allied countries had to release 53 imprisoned militants. If their demands weren't met by the afternoon of July 1st, they would begin executing the hostages. This map illustrates the brutal logistical reality facing the Israeli war room. Entebbe was over 4,000 kilometers away, buried behind a massive expanse of hostile airspace that blocked any direct military response. Military planners scrambled for solutions. One early proposal involved dropping naval commandos into Lake Victoria, navigating by boat to the edge of the airport, and storming the terminal from the water. The plan failed the moment they thought about the exit. Extracting over 100 panicking civilians onto small boats under heavy Ugandan military fire, with the dark waters teeming with crocodiles, offered zero chance of a clean escape. A standard border infiltration would end in a massacre. To survive, Israel needed a method that completely bypassed traditional military logistics, allowing them to strike with overwhelming force before Uganda's army even knew they were there. Israeli intelligence scoured their archives and found a massive advantage. An Israeli construction firm, Solel Bone, had built that exact Entebbe terminal back in the 1960s. Using original blueprints and fresh intelligence gathered from non-Israeli passengers who had been released to Paris, engineers built an exact one-to-one physical replica of the terminal in Israel. Commandos immediately began drilling room-clearing tactics. Covert stealth was impossible inside a heavily guarded military compound. Instead, the mission, dubbed Operation Thunderbolt, would rely on absolute lightning-fast execution, moving so quickly the enemy couldn't organize a response. To deliver a strike force 4,000 kilometers away, they chose 4 C-130 Hercules aircraft. These planes were designed to carry massive cargo loads and could drop onto short, unlit dirt runways, making them the perfect vehicle for a deep inland assault. Matching the terminal blueprints with the brute utility of the C-130s allowed the strike team to plan for specific rooms and exit points, turning a suicide mission into an executable reality. Landing the planes was only half the problem. The assault team still had to cover a long stretch of open tarmac to reach the old terminal, without triggering the heavily armed Ugandan guards. They devised an audacious deception. They packed an exact replica of Idi Amin's personal motorcade, a black Mercedes flanked by Land Rovers, into the cargo hold of the leading C-130 plane. Flying completely under the radar, the first plane touched down in the dark with its lights off and engines dialed back. The ramp dropped, and the fake motorcade rolled directly onto the tarmac, moving at the exact cruising speed Amin always used. 2 days earlier, Idi Amin had swapped his black car for a white one. As the commandos rolled forward in their dark Mercedes, the Ugandan guards instantly saw the discrepancy and raised their rifles. An Israeli commando shot one guard with a silenced pistol from the window, but another operator in the trailing Land Rover fired an unsuppressed rifle. The loud crack echoed across the runway, blowing their cover entirely. The team abandoned the cars and sprinted the final 300 meters under machine gun fire. Bursting through the doors, the strike team eliminated the hijackers in seconds. But during the intense crossfire outside, the assault commander, Netanyahu, was fatally shot by a Ugandan soldier firing from the control tower. Despite losing their leader and their element of surprise, the commandos never hesitated. Because they had obsessively trained on the one-to-one replica, they moved through the complex on pure muscle memory, clearing every room exactly as they had rehearsed. Within 53 minutes of touching down, the Israeli forces loaded 102 hostages onto the waiting cargo planes, destroyed Uganda's fleet of MiG fighters to prevent aerial pursuit, and lifted off into the night sky. There was one devastating casualty left behind. Dora Bloch, an elderly hostage who had been transferred to a local hospital before the raid, ultimately remained in Uganda. Idi Amin's forces later murdered her in retaliation for the strike. Back home in Israel, the sheer scale of the rescue was instantly overshadowed by the tragic loss of Yoni Netanyahu. As the sole commando killed in the raid, he became an eternal symbol of national sacrifice. His martyrdom generated an immense wave of national sympathy. This powerful legacy cast a long shadow, pulling his younger brother, Benjamin Netanyahu, into the public eye and launching a political career that eventually led to the Prime Minister's office. Operation Thunderbolt remains the gold standard for special operations, proving that meticulous engineering and absolute audacity can overcome the constraints of geography and hostile politics.